March 21st, 2025. Inside the Oval Office, a shadowed rendering sits on an easel beside the President of the United States. It shows an aircraft almost no one outside the Pentagon has ever seen. In that moment, decades of secrecy quietly came to an end. Boeing had just secured a $20 billion contract to build America's first operational 6th-generation fighter. The announcement confirmed what had only existed in whispers. The F-47 was real, not a concept, not a proposal. Already in production, the Air Force made its choice. Full commitment, full funding, a platform designed to dominate the skies by the end of this decade. But beneath the headlines, another story was unfolding, one far more complicated. While the F-47 surged forward with billions in backing, the Navy's own 6th-generation program was quietly stripped down. Funding collapsed to tens of millions. Timelines slipped. 2 future fighters, 1 industrial base, and the Pentagon made a gamble that could reshape American air power for the next 50 years. Only one program would move fast. Only one would survive. And history suggests the consequences of that choice may echo far longer than anyone expects. Because this wasn't the first time America stood at a crossroads in fighter design. More than 30 years earlier, another aircraft promised to change everything and was quietly set aside. In the early 1990s, the YF-23 Black Widow II emerged as a machine that terrified even its creators. Faster, stealthier, and longer range than anything in the sky, it was built to strike without ever being seen. On paper, the YF-23 should have won. It could super cruise effortlessly, penetrate deep into defended airspace, and disappear before the enemy knew it was there. It was the embodiment of future air combat. But history chose differently. The YF-22 became the F-22 Raptor, and the Black Widow was sent to a museum. At the time, it looked like the end of that story. In reality, it was only the beginning, because the design philosophy behind the YF-23 never died. It went underground, waiting for the moment when technology, strategy, and urgency finally aligned. To understand why the YF-23 mattered, you have to remember the moment it was born. The Cold War was ending, but new threats were already forming beyond the horizon. The Pentagon wasn't looking for a fighter that could win dogfights. It wanted an aircraft that could decide battles before the enemy ever knew it was there. Northrop's answer was radical. A tailless, diamond-shaped aircraft built around range, stealth, and speed, not aerial theatrics. The YF-23 could cruise at supersonic speeds without afterburners, carry less fuel, yet fly farther, and present a radar signature so small it bordered on theoretical. In many ways, it was already a 6th-generation aircraft, decades before the term even existed. Test pilots who flew the YF-23 knew immediately what they were dealing with. This wasn't a fighter designed to be seen. It was designed to arrive unseen, strike first, and leave nothing behind but confusion. Its buried engines reduced infrared signature. Its exhaust geometry masked heat. Its shape scattered radar energy so effectively that detection ranges collapsed. The aircraft wasn't built to win air shows. It was built to win wars. And yet, despite outperforming expectations, the YF-23 lost. Not because it failed technically, but because the moment wasn't ready for it. Doctrine lagged behind engineering. Welcome to Jet Vision. This is where speculation ends and reality begins. While most people only see what's public, we break down what's classified, what's emerging, and what's about to reshape air dominance forever. If you support America's military and the men and women who protect the skies, drop a salute in the comments. Before we go further, understand this. Over 98% of people watching Jet Vision aren't subscribed. If you value deep analysis like this, hit subscribe and support the channel. It costs nothing, and it keeps this channel flying. Because the lesson of the YF-23 matters now more than ever. Its disappearance didn't erase its influence. It buried it until the Air Force needed it again. That need returned as the strategic environment shifted. Long-range missiles, dense air defenses, and peer adversaries changed what air superiority actually meant. Dogfights became secondary. Survival, reach, and first-shot advantage became decisive. Suddenly, the philosophy behind the YF-23 didn't look outdated. It looked prophetic. Fast forward to the 2020s. the Air Force quietly began flying full-scale demonstrators for its next-generation air dominance program. No press releases, no images, just results. Those secret flights validated something critical. The future fighter would need the YF-23's DNA, extreme stealth, long-range, sustained speed, but with modern systems layered on top. That aircraft became the F-47, not a copy of the Black Widow, but its evolution, refined by 3 decades of technological progress and hard lessons learned. Where the YF-23 relied on pure aerodynamic brilliance, the F-47 adds something the Black Widow never had: artificial intelligence at the core of its design. The F-47 isn't just a fighter. It's a command platform built to control and coordinate autonomous systems across the battle space in real time. This is where the generational gap becomes clear. The YF-23 could dominate alone. The F-47 dominates by multiplication. Through collaborative combat aircraft, the F-47 extends its reach far beyond its own airframe, scouting, jamming, striking, and absorbing risk without putting a pilot in danger. It's the same stealth-first philosophy the YF-23 pioneered, but scaled for modern warfare, where information, not just performance, decides victory. The YF-23 was built around a single, uncompromising idea: avoid detection at all costs. Every design choice served that goal. Its exhausts were buried to suppress heat. Its surfaces were aligned to scatter radar. Even its silhouette was engineered to confuse tracking systems. It wasn't meant to fight fair, it was meant to fight first. The F-47 inherits that mindset, but it goes further. Modern stealth is no longer just about shape and materials. It's about managing signatures across radar, infrared, electronic emissions, and even data links. The F-47 was designed from the start to control all of them simultaneously, something the YF-23 could only achieve passively. This is where time becomes the deciding factor. In the early 1990s, computing power, sensors, and networking simply weren't ready to support what the YF-23 hinted at. The aircraft was ahead of its ecosystem. The F-47 arrives in an era where those supporting technologies finally exist. Modern battlefields move at machine speed. Decisions are made in seconds, not minutes. The F-47's onboard systems process threats, fuse sensor data, and distribute targeting information across manned and unmanned assets faster than any human could alone. That isn't an upgrade, it's a shift in how air combat works. The YF-23 proved that stealth and speed could redefine dominance. The F-47 proves that dominance now comes from integration, linking aircraft, drones, sensors, and weapons into a single adaptive force that evolves during the fight itself. Range is where the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. The YF-23 was engineered to fly far beyond the limits of its time, giving it a combat radius that shocked even Air Force planners. It was built for deep penetration missions, designed to strike from distances that would keep tankers safely out of reach. That philosophy now defines the F-47. The F-47 pushes that concept to its limit. With a combat radius exceeding 1,000 nautical miles, it doesn't just reach farther than the F-22. It fundamentally reshapes where American air power can operate from. Bases once considered too distant suddenly become launch points. The battle space expands in America's favor. This is where the YF-23's ghost becomes unmistakable. 30 years ago, it warned the Air Force that range would matter more than raw maneuverability. Today, in a Pacific theater defined by distance and denial, that warning reads less like theory and more like prophecy. Speed follows the same pattern. The YF-23 demonstrated true supercruise when others could not, sustaining supersonic flight without afterburners and without announcing its presence to the world. That capability was revolutionary then. It is foundational now. The F-47 builds on that legacy with adaptive propulsion systems that the Black Widow's designers could only dream of. Engines that change their own airflow in flight allow the aircraft to prioritize efficiency in one moment and raw thrust the next, extending range, increasing speed, and rewriting tactical options mid-mission. But propulsion is only part of the equation. What ultimately separates generations of fighters is how they survive inside contested airspace. The YF-23 relied on passive stealth, its ability to remain unseen long enough to strike and disengage. It assumed the enemy would never know it was there. The F-47 assumed something more dangerous, that at some point detection may occur, and when it does, the aircraft must still dominate. This is where active survivability enters the picture. Electronic warfare systems that don't just evade radar, but confuse it, blind it, and rewrite what the enemy believes it's seeing. Modern air defenses don't rely on a single sensor. They fuse radar, infrared search and track, passive detection, and networked data from multiple platforms. The F-47 was designed to fight inside that environment, managing every emission, every return, and every signal in real time. This is something the YF-23 could never fully do, not because it was flawed, but because the world around it wasn't ready. The sensors didn't exist. The processors weren't powerful enough. The networks hadn't been built. The aircraft arrived decades too early. The F-47 arrives at exactly the opposite moment. It benefits from 30 years of digital warfare, artificial intelligence, and electronic combat evolution. It doesn't just inherit the YF-23's stealth-first philosophy, it completes it, turning invisibility from a passive trait into an actively managed weapon. Then there is the question of scale. The YF-23 was brilliant, but it was still a product of a different acquisition era. It was designed as a singular masterpiece, not as the center of a broader combat ecosystem. The F-47 was conceived differently from day one. It is not meant to fight alone or even be counted individually. It exists as the command node of a distributed force, where its true strength comes from what it controls rather than what it carries internally. This is where the balance begins to tilt. The YF-23 could penetrate enemy airspace undetected. The F-47 can do that, and simultaneously direct multiple unmanned aircraft to extend its reach, absorb risk, and overwhelm defenses through coordination rather than brute force. Collaborative combat aircraft change the equation entirely. Missiles, sensors, electronic attack payloads, and decoys no longer have to be carried by the manned fighter itself. The F-47 becomes the brain, not the body, of the formation. This is something the Black Widow was never designed to do. Not because its designers lacked vision, but because the technology to make it possible simply did not exist. In this moment, the F-47 doesn't replace the YF-23's philosophy. It finally gives it the scale it always needed. Another difference matters just as much as performance: industrial reality. The YF-23 was born into a defense environment already under pressure. Budgets were tightening, the Cold War had ended. Political appetite for large fighter fleets was fading fast. Even if the Black Widow had won, it likely would have faced the same fate as the F-22. Reduced production, rising costs, a boutique fleet too small to fully shape global air power. The F-47 enters service under very different conditions. The threat environment is clear, immediate, and undeniable. Peer competitors are flying 6th-generation prototypes today, not promising them tomorrow. That urgency changes everything. It creates political will. It unlocks funding. It forces long-term commitment rather than half measures. The F-47 exists because the Air Force can no longer afford hesitation. Where the YF-23 arrived too early for its moment, the F-47 arrives when delay is no longer an option. And that timing may be the single most decisive advantage it has. Cost has always been the silent killer of American fighter programs. The YF-23 never reached production, but even its rival did not escape this reality. The F-22 emerged victorious, yet its price climbed so rapidly that the Air Force was forced to cap production far below what strategic planners originally envisioned. Air dominance became exquisite, but scarce. The F-47 was shaped with that lesson in mind. Not cheap, never cheap, but engineered for sustainability. From manufacturing methods to maintenance philosophy, every decision reflects an understanding that an aircraft only matters if it can be built in meaningful numbers and kept operational over decades of service. This is where slightly better becomes critical. The F-47 does not need to outperform the YF-23 in every raw aerodynamic metric. It needs to outperform it in reality, in production rate, in upgrade potential, in its ability to absorb new technologies without redesigning the entire aircraft. The Black Widow was a masterpiece frozen in time. The F-47 is a living system. Its software-defined architecture allows sensors, weapons, and algorithms to evolve continuously. What flies in 2029 will not be the same aircraft flying in 2039. And that adaptability compounds its advantage year after year. This is why the F-47 ultimately edges ahead. Not because the YF-23 failed, but because it proved what was possible. The F-47 takes that proof, integrates modern intelligence, autonomy, and production discipline, and turns a visionary concept into sustained dominance. Pilot survivability is no longer just about avoiding enemy fighters. Modern battlefields are saturated with sensors, missiles, and layered defenses designed to kill aircraft long before a dogfight ever begins. The YF-23 anticipated this reality, but it was forced to rely almost entirely on stealth and speed to survive. The F-47 assumes a harsher truth. Even the best stealth can be challenged. Even the cleanest aircraft can be detected under the right conditions. So survivability now means redundancy, layers of protection working together instead of a single point of perfection. This is where doctrine shifts decisively. The F-47 is built to offload risk away from the pilot. Unmanned systems move forward into danger. Electronic warfare platforms absorb attention. Decoys trigger defenses. The manned aircraft stays further back, controlling the fight rather than entering it blindly. The YF-23 was designed for a world where the pilot and aircraft were inseparable. The F-47 is designed for a world where the pilot commands a battle space, not just an airframe. That distinction defines modern air dominance. In future conflicts, victory will belong to the side that preserves its pilots while exhausting the enemy's defenses. On that battlefield, the F-47's philosophy aligns perfectly with reality, where survival is achieved through coordination, distance, and control rather than raw performance alone. The YF-23 decision left scars inside the Air Force. Engineers knew what they had built. Pilots knew what it could do. But procurement reality overruled capability, and the service carried that lesson forward, sometimes consciously, sometimes not. The F-47 reflects a different mindset. It isn't chasing perfection in a single performance metric. It's balancing stealth, range, autonomy, and producibility in a way that avoids creating another brilliant aircraft that exists only in limited numbers. That balance matters because history doesn't reward what looks best on paper. It rewards what shows up, survives, and adapts. The F-47 was shaped by that understanding, an aircraft designed to evolve rather than impress on day one. Before we continue, if you support America's military and the men and women who defend it, drop a salute in the comments, hit like, and subscribe to Jet Vision. Over 98% of viewers watch without subscribing, and that single action keeps this channel bringing you the stories others won't. Because the comparison between the YF-23 and the F-47 isn't about which aircraft was more beautiful or more radical. It's about which one could survive the realities of modern war and the realities of modern decision-making, long enough to actually matter. Timing is the invisible force behind every successful weapon system. The YF-23 arrived at the end of the Cold War when urgency evaporated and budgets tightened. The F-47 arrives in the opposite moment, when peer competitors are openly challenging American air dominance and delay carries real strategic risk. China's rapid progress makes that clear. 6th-generation prototypes are already flying. Long-range missiles, dense air defenses, and networked sensors are being fielded at scale. This is no longer a theoretical future. It's a competitive race happening in real time. In that environment, the Air Force cannot afford another exquisite aircraft that exists in small numbers. It needs a system that can be produced, upgraded, and sustained while threats evolve. The F-47 was shaped around that reality from the beginning. This is where the YF-23's warning becomes instructive rather than tragic. It showed what happens when vision outruns commitment. The F-47 applies that lesson by pairing advanced design with political will, industrial readiness, and a clear operational demand. In other words, the F-47 doesn't just arrive with better technology. It arrives with the one advantage the Black Widow never had: time finally working in its favor, not against it. Industrial momentum decides wars long before the first shot is fired. The YF-23 never reached that phase. It remained an engineering triumph without a production engine behind it. Once the decision was made, the industrial base moved on, and the opportunity closed permanently. The F-47 enters a different reality. Production lines are already being built. Skilled labor is being trained. Supply chains are being locked in for decades, not years. This aircraft is no longer an idea. It's an industrial commitment. That commitment matters because modern air dominance isn't defined by a single jet in the sky. It's defined by how many can be launched, sustained, upgraded, and replaced when losses occur. Scale turns capability into power. This is where the F-47 quietly pulls ahead. Even if the YF-23 was ahead of its time aerodynamically, it never reached the stage where numbers could change strategy. The F-47 is being built with scale in mind, not as a boutique force. In the end, slightly better doesn't mean faster or stealthier by a margin. It means present, available, adaptable, and numerous enough to matter when deterrence fails and conflict becomes unavoidable. The YF-23 never flew in combat, but its influence never disappeared. Its design philosophy quietly reshaped how engineers thought about survivability, range, and first-shot dominance. In many ways, it became the reference point for what the future should look like. The F-47 doesn't erase that legacy, it absorbs it. Every emphasis on long-range penetration, every decision to prioritize stealth over spectacle, traces a direct line back to the Black Widow's original intent. But where the YF-23 became a symbol of what might have been, the F-47 is becoming a symbol of follow-through. It represents a defense establishment that finally aligned vision, funding, and urgency. This is why the comparison matters. Not to crown a winner decades later, but to understand evolution. The YF-23 showed America the destination. The F-47 builds the road to get there. In that sense, the F-47 isn't just slightly better. It's better in the way that counts most, by ensuring that revolutionary ideas don't end up behind museum ropes, but on active flight lines shaping real outcomes. Because the lesson of the YF-23 isn't safely locked in history, it's alive right now. Every decision surrounding the F-47 carries the risk of repeating old patterns, delays, budget cuts, reduced buys, and political compromise. If production slows, if numbers shrink, if commitment wavers, the F-47 could follow the same path as its predecessor. Not because it failed technologically, but because resolve failed strategically. America's competitors are not making that mistake. They are building at scale, accepting incremental improvements, and prioritizing presence over perfection. That approach is dangerous, but effective. The F-47 only fulfills its promise if it avoids becoming another silver bullet force. Dominance requires numbers, readiness, and the willingness to sustain capability over decades, not election cycles. The ghost of the YF-23 exists to remind us of that truth. Brilliant design alone does not secure air superiority. Commitment does. So when the comparison is finally made, F-47 versus YF-23, the answer isn't about which aircraft was more daring, more radical, or more misunderstood. The YF-23 was a vision ahead of its time. It proved what stealth, range, and speed could achieve when freed from traditional thinking. But vision alone could not carry it into service. The F-47 arrives as that vision realized. Not reinvented, not abandoned, but completed, built with the technologies, doctrine, and urgency the Black Widow never had. It is slightly better not because it flies dramatically faster or looks more exotic, but because it exists in numbers, integrates unmanned systems, adapts over time, and fits the reality of modern warfare. That difference is everything. History remembers ideas. Wars are won by systems that endure. The YF-23 warned the Air Force what the future would demand. The F-47 answers that warning with action. Together, they tell a single story. One of innovation delayed, lessons learned, and capability finally delivered when it matters most. If America maintains its commitment, the F-47 will not become another museum piece. It will become the standard by which air dominance is measured for decades to come. The YF-23 showed us what was possible. The F-47 proves we were finally ready. What you've just seen isn't theory. It's the reality shaping tomorrow's air dominance. From forgotten prototypes to sixth-generation breakthroughs, one truth remains clear. Control of the skies decides everything that follows. If you support America's military, the engineers who build these aircraft, and the pilots who fly them into harm's way, hit like, subscribe to Jet Vision, and drop a American flag salute in the comments. Over 98% of viewers watch without subscribing, and your support keeps these stories alive. We'll continue bringing you the developments they don't break down, the programs still hidden in plain sight, and the technology defining global power. Thanks for watching. Stay informed, stay ready, and stay proud.